welcome, and I'll let him finish off his introduction. Thank you.
So, thanks, Rick. So I've got a talk to do before the talk. So this isn't the talk, this is a talk about talks. Okay, so following on from what Roy was saying about the lightning talk competition is I wanted to just share some of my experience as I've been involved in that and speaking at this event. And what I've ended up doing is creating a really self-indulgent kind of talk, which has got me in photos on every slide. And that wasn't the point. The point was about the talking. So if it comes across as, look at me, that's not what it's meant to do. So this is kind of my journey of talking, including events here. I'll go through them one by one, but I'll go through quickly. 2014 February, that's from the event. That's what I look like. I was talking about DevOps, and I've not shut up about it since. And this is what 10 years of DevOps does to you. Don't do DevOps. But that was one of my first speaking gigs, like proper speaking gigs, and I was absolutely terrified. The idea of speaking in front of people was really scary, and I think the thing about events like this, if you are thinking about doing it, which is kind of the point of this, is they are super safe. I don't think, well, hopefully nobody's here to watch me fall on my backside tonight doing this talk. I hope you're all here to watch the talk and learn from it. So these events are super important. If I whiz forward to 2016, I did the lightning talk competition. That's a really crude grab from YouTube of me doing my talk. There's a countdown clock thing there. And that's the one I won. But the point of this talk is I then repurposed it at another conference, which then led on to great things. So by this point, I'd started doing more speaking, and I did the joint Leeds Festival event between Agile in Leeds and Agile Yorkshire. And the reason I did that is because I got invited to DevOps Enterprise Summit, Gene Kim's thing, and I did that talk in London. And then he said, would you like to come to San Francisco and do it, and we'll pay your airfare and your hotel, which I thought about for a whole 4 seconds before saying yeah. But while I was there, Damon Edwards, God, this sounds like a right name-dropping thing now. Damon Edwards is one of the party vendors of the CAMS paradox in DevOps. He was running an Ignite talks, and he said, does anybody want to do one who's already speaking? So what I did was I took that talk from Agile Yorkshire and I turned it into an Ignite. So that's like 20 slides, 15 seconds each, 5-minute talk, they auto advance. And I did this kind of like almost stand-up comedy version of that. And it went down a storm, so much so that the following year, or 2 years later, when I put in again to talk at Enterprise Summit, they went, you're good in front of people, you can have the main stage in a keynote. And they told me that was off the back of that Ignite and working with the crowd. So that's all down to the Agile Lightning talk thing that we did. Come on in. So it's kind of important that. That's what 1,000 people looks like from the side of the stage. It's pretty terrifying. But yeah, I did that. And apart from fluffing up the ending, it was actually great. Final thing is events like this are important for me because I'm doing speaking, like testing atelier. The talk I'm doing tonight is when I started at the testing atelier. Anyone been to the testing atelier? Anybody know about it? It's kind of like a bit of a punk rock tech conference that happens in Leeds. It's completely put on by a bunch of volunteers from the test community, and it sells out like that. And it's really popular, and it's really good because the talks they have are like really high quality. But I did that talk there, and then I did it at DevOpsDays Birmingham on a slightly bigger screen than we've got tonight. They give me an iMac screen. And then off the back of doing that at another meetup group, I then got invited to do it at QCon and in San Francisco, but I couldn't do that for reasons. But I did that in London in April. So although this looks like really self-indulgent, the point is events like this and that competition are a really good way to get foot on the ladder of public speaking. And trust me, if a shy, introverted, nerdy little person like me that I was 10 years ago can do it, anyone in this room can do it. So this is super important. So groups that like what Roy runs and Tom helps with, Ethan at the back is running mainly the DevOps groups now. Their lifeblood is speakers, and we need as many as we can. So come along to these environments and speak because they're super supportive and super important that we do those. Okay.
I want to clap you then.
Right. Anyone want a freebie? Okay, good. Yeah. Right, so another thing I do, along with Ethan, who's at the back there, is we run a conference in London called DevOps Days. We're not for profit, we don't make any money out of this, we do it because we give a stuff about people's experience of doing day jobs in DevOps. And we run that at the QE2 Centre in London. We're running it this year at the end of September. These are the speakers which we got on. Some leads names on here. There's this guy called Matthew Skelton, which you might have heard of. Sorrel Harriet speaking, if you know Sorrel. And we've also got some bloke called Patrick Dubois, who you might have heard of in the DevOps community. He's coming along. He only talks about AI now, but it's Patrick, so sod it, it's fine. A whole bunch of other people. And then we've got 12 other speakers doing Unites as well, including like some biggish names as well. So we're really pleased with the agenda we put together and who's speaking. We think it's going to be really, really, really good this year. And ticket sales are looking good, so don't miss out. We pride ourselves on it being an inclusive conference. So we have a diverse speaker lineup, that would be silly. A diverse speaker lineup. Code of conduct's important and we enforce it. We have thrown people out before who have misbehaved, like KubeCon. And we don't have like badge scanners and stuff. You have to like if you want to talk to a sponsor, they have to kind of like earn your email or your contact details so you can go and speak to them without fear of being dittered, because I hate that at conferences. Pronoun badges, communication preferences, lanyards, quiet room. We have a childcare room. We don't run that. We get nannies in. We don't have a row for me. I'm not going to look after your kid, but you can bring your kids if you want. There's a faith room. The food, when we run a conference, we don't want you going away thinking the only thing you remember about a conference is how bad the food was. It's top notch. We work very hard on the food and we pay a fortune for it as well. So come along. We've got live captioning. We've got BSL interpreters on the stage translating for you. And we pride ourselves on accessibility and being inclusive. So come along if you want to. That conference, for a 2-day conference in central London, single track in the morning talks, followed by open spaces in the afternoon. And if you've not done open spaces, they are an incredible way to learn and share. Everybody is a bit confused when they get there, but comes away loving them. And you can have that for the bargain price of £249. That's not bad, is it, for a 2-day conference in London? But I don't want you to pay £249. Oh no, I want you to come for free. So at the back, under the beer bottles and the cups, thanks for whoever's put that there, there's some pencils, bits of paper, write your name down on it, stick it in the bowl, and we will draw the winner at the end. You need to be here when we draw it, okay? If you want to come along, you can win a ticket. If not, you can buy one. If you are from an underrepresented group in tech or unwaged, there is a wait list at the minute for free tickets. We do give those out. If you want to help someone come to the conference who is underrepresented or unwaged in the conference, you can pay 350 quid for a ticket and we'll let someone in off the waiting list as well. So check out DevOpsDays London. The stickers, take the stickers. It's got the URL on. Come along to it. That's going to be great. Yay, right. Right. I should do the main talk now, shouldn't I? Because time's cracking on. Right, so let's talk about developer experience. So let's do introductions, first of all. So, and this is as technical as this talk gets, this piece of YAML here. I'm Andy, as you probably know already. I am a big fan of Kubernetes and YAML. So this is me as a Kubernetes manifest, if you know what those things are. If not, don't worry about it. I work at Flutter UK and Ireland, where we're hosting the event next month, home to some of the biggest brands in sports betting and gaming. I am a principal platform engineer, which means I work with Kubernetes, building and running clusters, with a focus on developer experience. Now, developer experience at the minute is somewhat of an overloaded term. It's quite in vogue. If you go on LinkedIn, you will no doubt see posts from various companies. So I'm just going to spend a minute setting the perception and the understanding of the context of where I'm talking about developer experience and how it relates to this talk. Because, as I say, there are many, many definitions flying around. Am I talking about productivity? Am I talking about portals? Am I talking about platforms? Well, I'm kind of talking about all of those. And the reason this is particularly in vogue at the minute is there's a whole bunch of research being published by a company called GetDX. They produce software that does developer productivity measurement. And they published a whole load of research. They work with academia. They work with Nicole Frosgren of Accelerate, State of DevOps Report, and Durametrics fame. And they produce a whole load of compelling metrics about how developer experience is tightly linked to developer productivity, but a load of research based off the SPACE framework, which Nicole worked on, and how that's evolved into some of the more modern methods that they use. So there's a whole load of stuff there, and that's new and modern, But what I'm going to talk to you about tonight is something we started doing in 2019 when we didn't have all this stuff. The nearest kind of definition we had to developer experience was this, particularly from the perspective of a platform team where I work. So a set of tools and services arranged into a compelling product for developers to use. So that's kind of the mantra of what we're talking about tonight. So before we get into talking about how developer experience was implemented at Flutter, we need to go way back, all the way to 2016, and talk about the problem that we were trying to solve at that time. Now, at that time, many people were talking about running Docker in production. Do you remember those days and what a maverick you were if you were doing that and how cutting edge you were? Well, back at Flutter, we wanted to do that. So this document here is a wiki page that's got kind of the outline proposal for what became the Kubernetes cluster. But if you can see it and you're close enough, I will share the slides. What it talks about is outside of the squad, there should be no humans involved in the value stream between feature and customer. It's not talking about tech, it's not talking about technology, it's talking about delivering value from developers. So going from that idea of how do I get code in front of the customers quickly and safely, how do I do that without having to raise tickets with infrastructure teams or security or all the other kind of like obstacles which we faced back in 2016. And after many proof of concepts, we decided on Kubernetes. I wasn't in the team at this point, but there's somebody here tonight who is that person just there. You know who you are. And we had a Kubernetes cluster. Now, we built this following platform as a product from the ground up. So it wasn't just that there's a Kubernetes cluster. It was working with a customer, the shiny yellow people over here, to actually build out a platform for them to build their application on. This was like our first foray into AWS as well. Later it was ported to on-prem. And we built it not just as Kubernetes, we put integrations in place. Eventually, I think like firewall integrations, load balancers, certs, DNS, logging, a whole bunch of other stuff as well. So it wasn't just simple Kubernetes, there was actually like functionality built into it as a platform. So following that paradigm of platform as a product. This was way before the days of AKS, EKS, insert name of the platform. So it was all kind of built by hand with hand-rolled Terraform and our own tooling to build out and manage that platform. As I say, originally on AWS, but also later on-prem. And then as the platform became popular and we got more teams wanting to use it, we introduced RBAC because making sure that people can't tread on each other's toes is important. And if we whiz forward all the way to 2018, we're now part of infrastructure and we've got lots and lots of customers. So this is great. We've got loads of people wanting to use the platform. They prefer it to the existing virtual machine infrastructure which was in place. They're all really quite enjoying working on Kubernetes. So this is a success, right? Sort of. Apart from inside this team, where I was at this point, just joined, I wasn't the cause of this. I was just working on it. So now there are a lot of unhappy platform engineers in there. Could put it down to growing pains. Victim of our own success. Ways of working not really scaling. Code bases weren't really decoupled from one another. Treading on each other's toes. Getting stuff done was hard. So we made some changes. What we did is we broke this team, the platform engineering team as it was, into 3 separate sub-teams. We had the engine team that looked after the building and running and maintenance of Kubernetes cluster. We had the capabilities team, which looked after all those integrations and add-ons, so things like logging, monitoring, certs, DNS, etc. And then we had an experimental team, which I got put in charge of. We called it customer experience, but as our customers were developers, we were kind of developer experience team as well. So I'll probably use those 2 phrases interchangeably, but I mean the same thing. In the context of tonight's talk, I'm definitely talking about developer experience. And we're an experiment. Nobody's done this in the organization before. So if we mess up or we fail, well, we can pivot or we'll just fall back into the engine team and work out what we can do. With the aim to make things better for our developers, but also focus on improving the lives of our platform engineers as well. So we've got a blank sheet of paper. This is exciting. What do we do? Well, that's a really good question and one we asked ourselves. So the first thing we do is we baseline where we are. We need to understand where we are so we can improve on it. We can't improve if we don't know where we are. So we create a sort of a mini state of DevOps report for the container platform, state of container platforms. And we do that by surveying the users. So we send out a survey to the users or perceived users of our platform. We get around 31 responses from this, and considering there's only probably a couple of hundred developers in the organisation and not all of those are using our platform, we're quite pleased with that number. We would like more, we'd always like more, but we were quite pleased with that. The survey itself is anonymous because not only do we want the good, we want the bad and we want the ugly. We felt we'd get that if we did that from an anonymous perspective. And in it, we ask people which area of the business they work in, which clusters they're using, which of those integrations, those capabilities are they using. And the smart thing we did is we include something called usability statements. So a usability statement goes along the lines of, I find doing X on the cluster easy. Do you strongly disagree, agree, or strongly agree? And there's about 9 of those for various features that exist on the cluster. I'll elaborate a little bit more on them, and you can certainly see the detail in the slides when you get them later. And the spoiler, I'll go into the details as we go through the years. We'll do a year-on-year comparison. But everything's really positive from the perspective of the developers. We get some gushing feedback and we get some constructive stuff as well, but they kind of tell us stuff we already knew, like our documentation was a bit rubbish and our onboarding process was a little bit on the complicated side. So this is good. We've got a starting point. And from the developer's perspective, this is actually quite good. So can we improve on that? So into our first year proper as a team, what do we do? And again, another good question, and we should write that down. So I found something called an OKR template. I know what one is now. I didn't at the time. So I kind of bodged together this mission statement into an OKR template. And the idea being that by the whole team working on this and put it together, we would have like a common shared understanding of what we were meant to do. So we settled on this idea of engaging with customers, supporting customers, and empowering customers, which sound a little bit kind of like waffly terms, but essentially they're what we're trying to do as a team. So anything we are asked to do that doesn't fall in that remit, we probably shouldn't be doing. So the next thing we need to do is work out who these customers are that we're going to empower, engage, and support. Who are they? Again, another damn good question. Apart from the ones that wandered up to our desk in the days when you could do that and asked us questions, and the one that pinged us on Slack, we weren't entirely sure who our customers were. So we decided to work that out. So any organisation, support requests are done via a chatbot mechanism. So there's a help bot that lives in the Slack channels for each of the products. So if someone wants help, they go into the Slack channel for the product or service, they type /help and describe their problem. That will summon an engineer to come and look at that problem and work with that person to hopefully get to a solution, and then they can close off that request. In the background, all that information, all that transcript, all that discussion goes into a Jira ticket. No one goes into that Jira ticket or does anything with it. It's kind of there just as a record. But what we realized is we could mine that and maybe reduce a bit of toil by creating an FAQ. So we did that to start with, and we signpost that from the various Slack channels, hopefully reduce some of the questions we were getting through. But also, anyone who has raised a support ticket for our service must be a customer of our service. So we've got a list of names. We could pull it out from 2 and a bit years worth of help desk tickets. That's good. What are they doing on the cluster? So what we did, and this is going to sound quite childish, but it worked really well, surprisingly, is we kind of went looking around the various wikis in the organisation and found the org charts for the various tribes in the company. Some of them were up to date. We were very surprised. And we printed them off on big A3 multi-page sheets and stuck them on a board. And then we used the super advanced technology of whiteboard marker pen to put a red dot against anyone who had raised a help desk ticket and a green dot against anyone who'd been on our training, because we started doing some initial training by that stage. And suddenly we got a visual map of who was using our stuff, who'd had training, who was having problems and hadn't had the training, so we could go and target them in training. We could see areas of the business weren't even using our stuff, so we knew that maybe some of the teams we could do a little bit of marketing to and get adoption up as well. We'd created a really primitive form of CRM system, which worked really well in the early days. Okay, so we know who our customers are now. We know which areas of the business they're in. We have to do the thing we don't like doing as techies now. We're going to have to go and talk to them. What we decided to do was we would create an open door meeting for each of the tribes every month. Keep that cadence really regular. Build those relationships and get the feedback going. So it's 4 tribes, 4 meetings a month. Open door policy. Anyone can come to those, even if you don't work in that tribe. We don't care. Open door policy. And it might just be my experience of doing meetings with techies, but we're not particularly good at doing them and making sure that things happen afterwards. So what we decided to do without going full hands-off Borough Council was we decided to at least have like a structure and a plan to that. So it went something like we would have a review of actions from the previous meeting. We have updates from the container platform team. So new features have been added, any maintenance windows, any plans we've got for the cluster or different environments. And then we flip it around the other way. What are our customers working on? What do they need help with? Are they having problems? Is there anything we can do to make that better? Any specific gnarly problems? And ask what's coming up. Bit of capacity planning, because particularly on-prem, there's tin underlying that, and we need to be mindful of that, just for capacity for the future. So we then, in another important step, is we actually minute all that. Again, this is completely open. Take all the permissions off the pages on the wiki. Anyone can come and look at these pages. And we put down, obviously, who said what, attribute things, tag everybody in it with what they said, and also follow-up actions as well, which is super important. 4 really good reasons this worked and why we do it. So first of all, number 1, if you were in the meeting, you knew what you said and what you did and what you had to follow up with. Number 2, if you weren't in the meeting and somebody delegated something to you, you get a notification via Confluence in our case that someone had mentioned you can go and check out what you needed to do. Thirdly, and probably most importantly, we could take this back to the engine team and the capabilities team and talk about what our customers and our development teams were actually doing on the cluster and what problems we're having. What we would do as well, if there's any particularly gnarly problems, we'd actually hook up developers across the 2 teams as well to work on any heavy technical issues. But by doing this, we're creating awareness, we're creating those feedback loops, and that's super important to be able to do that, because that gives the engine team and the capabilities team context for what they're doing. And we may even create stories off the back of those requests, or indeed roadmap items if it's a bigger piece of work. So creating that engagement. And the 4th reason it's important is we're an experiment. So by putting it out in the open, our boss can see what we're doing. There's a bit of accountability there as well. Okay, we did do some other actual work, you could say, from a technical perspective. Our logging pipeline was particularly congested in test, so noisy neighbor syndrome. So we had a single pipeline. What we did was we sharded that by tribe. The way the logging software worked out where logs should go is by metadata that we put onto the groups of Kubernetes workloads. It's what we call a namespace, if you're not familiar with that. So a group of workloads is what we call a namespace. And rather than keeping spreadsheets of ownership and stuff like that, like we used to, we actually stored the ownership information using this metadata on the actual namespaces in the cluster. So we stored the tribe, the squad, and the Slack channel if we ever needed to get hold of them. And that's the source of truth. And the logging software would use these labels to work out where to route the request, the logs to. And this came in incredibly useful for loads and loads of other stuff, which I'll share in a minute. The other thing is we put some automation around our onboarding just to make that a bit easier. Not a solved problem, but certainly easier. Okay, end of year 1. We're into the middle of 2020 at this point. So it's quite faint, that. So these are the usability questions. Again, it's generally good feedback. We've only got 25 responses though, but this is July 2020. Things were a bit different in July 2020. I don't know if you remember. Things were certainly different. So in terms of the usability statements, which seem to be a good yardstick for us, remember they were, I find doing X on the cluster easy, strongly disagree, disagree, red, agree, strongly agree, green. And in 2019, it was largely positive rather than negative, which is good. In 2020, some things have gone better, some things have gone worse, specifically our documentation. So we've got an idea of things we might be needing to focus on in the coming year and to put on our roadmap. And indeed, we did that. So we change our tact as we move into the middle of 2020 into 2021. Rather than it being a kind of like, how can we help you with the cluster? How do you have a good experience with it? We're changing it more around to like a shared experience, trying to create some shared responsibility. So it's how can we all work together better to ensure that this cluster is stable, reliable, and performant. And to do that, we really need developers to do the right thing. So how do we know what the right thing is? Well, let's write it down. So we produce a series of rules, if you like, standards, best practices, you might say, if you like that word, of what good looks like, what doing the right thing is. And we spread this across 3 areas of build, deploy, and run. So for an example would be something you shouldn't do is you shouldn't run with the latest tag on your Kubernetes deployments, because that image could be updated at any time and you might have involuntary live updates without any change management. So always use a tagged version, an example like that for the techies. And we classify all of these kind of like rules by Moscow. So we've got like a severity rating on there. And we work with the teams to collate this. We didn't write this. We heavily edited it and collated it, but we got sign off from each of the tribes to make sure that, you know, we got buy-in and it wasn't just us going, this is what we think good looks like. Now, the thing that we worked out after we put them into action, so to speak, is we couldn't really measure the build and deploy of these workloads, and I'll talk about tooling in a bit. But the run, once the stuff was on the cluster, we could actually codify about 20 of these rules using something called Open Policy Agent. We could create policies that said, you know, check this thing, and if it's not complying with this rule, we can have that as like an alerting status. You can actually block things as well, but we weren't trying to police, we were trying to garden, if you like. And off the back of that, we could use a tool called Gatekeeper, which would scrape the statuses of those severities or those policies, combine it with those namespace, tribe and squad labels as well, so we knew which particular workload it was, and then store it in a metric store, and then we could build a dashboard off it. So we could then go and get teams to go and look at their workloads and see if they've got anything that's bad on the cluster. Or you could look for see if there's a specific problem with a thing. We could go and look at who's breaking that rule. And obviously that gives access to everyone to look at that. The other thing we did is we did some basic cost management at this stage, because we're on a shared cluster in a single AWS account for the AWS stuff. We produce an offline report in Excel, we pull down the cost information, we combine that with the usage stats, which are broken down by namespace, tribe, and squad. You're getting the idea now. And we can basically build up a little bill there of what it would cost if we were cross-charging. But it gives awareness of that. It's not ideal because it's in an Excel spreadsheet. It's post-rational. It's a couple of days after the start of the month when we look at the previous month's figures. It's not great, more on what we did about that. But what we've got now is we've got data we can bring into our meetings. We can have discussions about the compliance of workloads and whether they're behaving and if there's anything that they need to go and fix because it's potentially going to put work at risk or something at risk. And we can talk about cost as well. If anything's got a runaway spiral in cost, we can have discussions about that. So we're in a little bit of a way starting to talk SLA-ish, potentially SLOs and SLAs off the back of that. But we never got that far, but we could do that. And then the documentation, because our survey said, it's not very good. So we spent a long time taking all 500 documents, removing the dead stuff, rewriting the out-of-date stuff, filling in the gaps, and generally restructuring it by product and by maintainer and by customer. And at the end of that, we were really pleased with it. It did take a very long time. So the results at the end of that third year, you can see these usability statements are looking a lot more green than they were. We've still got some way to go, but particularly the documentation one is improving. We're really pleased about this. Now, we're up to 30 responses at this point, and that's maybe a little bit of a sign that we need to take note of. Only 30 responses. And there's a lot more people using the cluster in year 3 than there was in year 1. That should be a lot higher. So, into the next year, 2021 to 2022, we start trying to empower the people that we've given responsibility to with tooling. So, in terms of like AWS costs, having a spreadsheet that no one can see and expecting them to care about costs is pretty stupid. So what we did is we pulled all the cost information metrics out of AWS into our metric store, combined that with the usage metrics by namespace, tribe, and squad, and we could dashboard it off that. So you could see the cost of your workload or your whole tribe's workloads. It's not quite near real time just because of the way the AWS costs work in our organization, but it's about a day out of date. But it's a lot better than it is from not even seeing the spreadsheet in the first place. And this dashboarding system is the one that the devs use, so the data is as close as we can get it to the devs. So if they want to pull cost information into their own dashboards, the data source is there. And we started seeing that with teams starting to do that. So there was a bot which runs in one of the teams, and they would pull in that severity score information we had off the dashboard by looking at the metrics and polling their metrics and pulling it into a little compliance report in their daily report, which was a bot that ran every day. We didn't even know they were doing this. We were super pleased about that. And I haven't really spoken about tooling, which I'm talking about DevX, will be of particular surprise to those people that are interested in DevX. So in the early days, there were no real frameworks to use. There was Helm you could use, but it was like version 1. But there were no real frameworks like there are now, like with Argo apps or with Kubevela or OLM or something like that. And it wasn't really our responsibility to dictate to the development teams what their SDLC was. And that was the rhetoric which we followed at that time. So although there were pipelines built originally for that first customer, and they were probably duplicated or adapted or adopted for other workloads, that was never really our responsibility. We kind of started at the cluster. Now, if we start again today, we'd probably have a very different idea about that, and we'd have some recommended frameworks to use. But in the interim couple of years, what developed was an inner source framework which was built by the development teams for the development teams, not by us, although we had some involvement in, or an interest in it at least. And that was a set of base images which were regularly rebuilt for the various language runtimes. There was a Helm chart which wrapped that, so if you created your image off that base image, you could use that Helm chart to use some pre-made pipelines in Jenkins to deploy your workloads onto the cluster. Now, the super smart thing that the team that built this did, and there's someone in here who was very instrumental in this, is they worked with the SLM team and got certain aspects of our security approval, what we called our acceptance into service documentation, pre-approved if you use this framework. And if you talk about a compelling platform, there is nothing more compelling to a developer than having less red tape to do, particularly when it involves security. So it's super great, that. And it's adopted in various forms around the business even today. Okay. So training. I can't overstate how important training was to the success of this platform. It was almost like a sales tool as well. As I say, we'd been doing some initial training even before we started doing the DevX thing, which was build an application on your laptop in Docker. You would build a little application. You'd write all the YAML. We made it really tricky so that you would learn from it. We taught you about 12-factor apps, the very first thing we did, so that you would build an application that would actually work, or rather than migrating something which would cause problems. So that was the basic training. That was a one-day workshop. Then in lockdown, we created a second one, which was we gave you access to our test cluster and gave you an application, and we taught you how to deploy it, how to add storage, how to add monitoring, how to add alerting, how to add load balancers, firewalls, a little bit of load testing, and I probably missed some other stuff that we do as well in that particular training. The idea being, if you do those 2 one-day workshops, by the end of it, you should be able to build and deploy an app onto our cluster without too much help from ourselves. Obviously, with experience comes the ability to do it properly. And then we created a third course, which was kind of like a potted version of that, which was like all the theory and how it worked in our organization, what the business benefits were, and perspectives for SLMs, because it was meant for kind of non-technical people or people that just didn't want to spend 2 days of their life elbow deep in YAML. And we always do a survey after the courses, and the net promoter scores we got off those were typically in the 90s, usually really high as well. We had over 500 people go through those courses. You could call it 250 because they probably did both, but that's still 3,000 person hours of training. At one point, it was so popular, I had a tribute act in one of the tribes which was running our training courses for us, and I didn't know about it until later. But that's kind of flattering, I suppose. But yeah, super important to the adoption of the cluster. I can't say how important that is. Right. End of 2022, we've nearly got rid of the red. But before we get all high-fivey and celebratory, 19 responses. there's a pattern here, there's something not right. So we looked at what we were doing, and at the beginning of 2023, we sort of decided to make some decisions, because the organisation which we set out with, which is pretty much how we worked with our developer experience persons here, with our container platform team there, originally we were working with end user development teams. But over time, in the 4 years, things changed. We found ourselves that there were platform teams or DevOps teams, call them what you will, that were effectively our more direct customers. And they were supporting the actual development teams. So we weren't so much working directly with those development teams. And what became apparent is we'd all got pretty good at this stuff. You know, we've been doing it for 4 years. And there was quality metrics that kind of told us that maybe we shouldn't do this with the same vigor we were doing. Maybe we shouldn't do this so proactively as like a job. Maybe we should just merge it into BAU and do some kind of like ad hoc developer experience. And what we'd seen over time is in the meetings, same faces, same questions, same discussions, same topics, diminishing returns from those meetings. We weren't getting the same value out of it that we were originally. And we'd matured massively as an operational team. We had checks and balances, and a lot of the things that could go wrong with the cluster we were already monitoring, or with customer workloads as well. We were monitoring for that stuff. So if anybody was misbehaving or doing anything daft, we kind of knew about it before they did, so we could then reach out to them proactively. Reactively rather than proactively. And the development teams and those ops teams had also matured a lot. They got their own documentation, they got their own run books. You know, they've been doing this stuff for a couple of years now. They didn't need the hand-holding and the support they needed in the early days. So we decided to pare it back so that we were just doing it kind of as a BAU task rather than as a regular thing. We stopped the monthly meetings, we kind of stopped the training as well, and we just do it as kind of like just a BAU thing now. There are some really bad quantitative metrics, to explain this as well, because what you might expect if that was a bad decision is from the beginning of 2023, you might expect to see a spike in help desk tickets from there. That didn't happen. And I know that's a terrible metric because help desk tickets are all different sizes and shapes and take different times, but just as a bad metric, at least it's not indicating that things have got worse. But you might say, Andy, are you actually getting any more stuff on the cluster though? As people just stop using it? Well, I've got this graph here. Sorry, there's a gap here where I haven't got the numbers. But this is the amount of CPU that's been requested by the workloads. 20% year on year. So there's more workloads going on the cluster. But you might say, Andy, is it new workloads or is it just stuff that's scaling up and using more of it? And this is the number of namespaces that are created. And we can still see after 2023, there's still namespaces being created and therefore there are new applications. So we're still seeing the cluster being used by customers, but we're not seeing any knock-on effect for stopping the developer experience, is what we've seen and what we're kind of proving a little bit with these numbers. I suppose the overall take-home for this is that developer experience creates experienced developers and platform engineers as well. And I think that's our takeaway from what we've seen in doing this. Just a quick mention of what we're doing next, which is our platform is, by modern standards, somewhat old, even though it's up to date. It's still, the tooling is still pretty much based on what it was originally. There are different ways to build and run Kubernetes now in a more modern and a more reliable and a more sustainable. And we've got the opportunity to do this not just for a single brand in UK and I, but for all the brands in UK and I. So there's like a whole new customer base, which we might be reaching out to. So we might be working with multiple clusters. So we need like fleet management as well, which our cluster doesn't do. And we also can start leveraging other teams inside our infrastructure team, which is a lot bigger than it used to be. We've got a cloud engagement team who do all the gnarly AWS stuff. We've got an observability team that run a centralized observability platform. Wouldn't it be good if all the metrics lined up across all the different estate? We could use them. Service management we already work with, but they've got some capacity analysis function within it. And there is a team called Developer Experience, which are more of a tooling and automation team that look after kind of like pipelines and stuff like that. So we can work with all of those to make that happen. And that's all now relevant. All this stuff that's happening here, all this research, all the frameworks, is now relevant, we can start leveraging that to make sure we build a new platform that everybody wants to use. That's even better than the one they already had. So, to summarize, gosh, I'm nearly on time. So, here's a list of the things we made and did and when we did them. Okay. What I would err on caution, and I've seen other people do this, is they go, there are some things we can do. We will cherry pick some of those and we will do a few of them. And we won't do them very well either. We'll just kind of have a go. So we'll have a try at it. Full-time job for me, 4 years. Like, there's a lot of work went into doing this. It is a job to do this. Creating Slack channels rather than actually creating meetings with people. That's not engagement. 3 monthly meetings is not engagement. You've got to do that cadence regularly, be disciplined. It's hard. Sometimes people don't come to your meetings, but you go again the next month. Sometimes too many people come to your meeting. You go again the next month. You create those relationships and build those. This is a socio-technical thing problem we're trying to solve here. It's not a technology problem, unfortunately. Training. We've found doing face-to-face training, or at least on Zoom, really got a lot of value out of that. And in terms of keeping it up to date, we could just change the demo code, or we could update a few slides. I've seen teams do screen recordings because they only want to do it once. But creating good screen recordings is really hard. Creating good video is really hard. Keeping it up to date is even harder because interfaces change, things look different, and making sure it doesn't get lost in the wiki wherever it's kept and just fades away because nobody's looking at it anymore is also really hard. If you're doing face-to-face training, keep on going. Surveys are super hard to do well. At least read Accelerate and understand what a good survey looks like. If you've got research people that can build and do this properly, get them involved because it's a proper job. I know when you go into Microsoft Forms or you go into Google Forms or SurveyMonkey, it'll launch a wizard for you. The output of that might not be as good as actually working with proper research people and understanding that. Do that. And then the one that winds me up is kind of when you get people that say, we've tried speaking with people. They don't want to listen to us. We've tried everything speaking to them. And to be honest, they think they know what they want, but we know what they actually need. And I think if you've got an attitude that your customers or users or development teams that are using your service are a problem, if you call them things like wetware, then maybe developer experience isn't something you should be doing. You really do need to stop treating your customers as a problem and your users as a problem. So in conclusion, it's a job, it's full-time. Go big or go home. It isn't a technical problem. There's the old saying that Docker will not solve your company culture. Kubernetes will not solve your company culture. Backstage will not solve your company culture. Tools don't solve company culture. Creating culture solves culture. But also be mindful when you've done everything and you're kind of at least done or you think you're done and you can start winding this stuff back. Make sure you understand the value of what you're offering and you're not just doing it because. And that's me. So hopefully you found that useful. I'm on LinkedIn. I won't read Twitter. But if you want to reach me, Andy Burgin on LinkedIn, I will share the slides somehow through Royd's amazing site on video. And don't forget to stick your name down to come along to DevOps Days at the back. We'll draw it at the end after the break. And I'm going to shut up now because I'm run over.